Okay, so I have, as usual, prepared some slides. This is the live coaching for September 2022. The topic today, reaching giving goals in a shifting giving landscape. So I'm going to share my screen here, get us started. Here's what I'm hoping that we can cover today. I'd like to talk and remind you a little bit about clarity of vision and plan. I want to reinforce some key aspects of your face-to-face approach. Want to talk specifically as we're getting into asking season at this point in the year about relationships and decisions for givers. I would like to emphasize a little bit your small group approach. I'd really like to push you and challenge you in a couple of areas in how you use small groups to develop momentum in your efforts. And then, as always, we'll try to bring all that together for you to really be able to apply into your work as a leader in your ministry. So bringing it all together and helping you apply it really is based on what you bring to this session, which is your questions, your comments. So I really would encourage you to take notes, type in questions in the chat as you think of them. I'll be reviewing those at times through this, and I'll also review the Q&A. And of course, you know me, I'll put you on the spot as well. Some of you that we can get the audio working, would love to have your questions directly so that others are hearing that firsthand. So here we go. Always like to start with the end in mind. We are in the last really 2 months of launching new coaching projects. We do not tend to start coaching in November or December. All of our focus at that time is on helping the leaders we serve finish the year strong. So if you have been thinking about joining coaching, interested in learning more about that, now is the time for sure, because we can have a big impact on the year-end giving efforts, as well as helping you move into the new year strong as well. So you can learn more about our approach on the website. You can reach us there. Of course, I'm sure you get emails from me. There's my email address. And you should be getting occasionally texts from me, not spam or selling things, but we try to invite people to these live coachings, challenge you, give you a thought. It is really me on the other side of this. So even though I use a system, if you text me, it's going to go directly to my phone, and I'll always respond. It might take me a little while, but I will always respond. So there are hundreds now, many hundreds of people that get direct to me on my mobile phone. So I'd invite you to take advantage of that. A simple timeline, I brought this up last month. A good way to think about where we are in the year right now is it's easy to think of end of December as a long way away, but it's actually a very short period of time away in terms of development efforts. Essentially, we're in a little over 2 6-week cycles remaining. So we kind of look at the end of the year as 6-week cycles, that there are 3. One of them began mid-August. So mid-August through September, we like to see you in thanking and reporting season. October through mid-November, asking season. Then mid-November through end of December, follow-up. So that's not a strict timeline or written in stone, but it's a good way to think about sort of where are we, and if you're doing events or various things like that, where is that falling in those cycles? Not to add pressure, but this time of year, I do think it's very important that we use our time very wisely. And part of that starts with measuring time. And then secondly, knowing what is most impactful that we could be doing with our time. So there's 2,500, a little over that, hours remaining in the giving year. That's 107 days, which sounds like a lot. That's 77 working days, about 13 working weeks remaining. So I think that's helpful because you can kind of assess, what am I accomplishing in a week? Okay, now I have 13 weeks that I'm working with, or what am I really doing each day that moves us forward? And I've got about 77 days remaining there. So I'd like to point that out to focus us. Now, this quote, I love this quote, Dr. Henry Cloud. If you want something you have never had, you'll have to do things you've never done. Embrace the pain and effort. As humans, we really avoid pain, and we have a hard time understanding the purposes of pain in God's design. But like everything else, pain has a purpose. Our Lord himself had to suffer pain unto the point of death to fully see God's plan revealed and accomplished. So if that is true of our Lord, why would we think that we would be able to avoid that as leaders? So there are seasons where you really have to embrace some pain and effort beyond what you've experienced before. What I find coming out of 2020 and 21 is that we've gone through a tremendous amount of pain and grief and suffering and struggle, many of us, through the pandemic. And so our tolerance level for this right now is very, very low. And my encouragement to you is to recognize that God is faithful and he will be there through the pain, through the effort, as well as on the successes and on the wins and the goals being achieved and the funding in place. He'll be there in that as well. So I, again, say that not to say toughen up or dig deep or try to motivate you, but to let you know it's okay. It's okay to recognize this can be hard, especially between now and the end of December. So this is something you've heard from me quite frequently. If you think about this from a leadership perspective and seeking giving and a shifting landscape, you cannot control sometimes the landscape. You can't control like what the market did yesterday, the most significant drop since 2020 during the pandemic. Can't control any of those things about the landscape. What you can be clear about in the landscape is what you are trying to accomplish, what your destination is, and then inviting people, even challenging people to respond to that along the way. That is what leaders do. So what we talk about in terms of getting clear on what you're trying to accomplish is your message, right? Your vision for lives, and the way you describe that life impact that you're trying to have, the way you describe what God has done up to this point, the way you help people understand you actually have a plan, and we do that by helping people understand the priorities that we have, and then the steps. So I know that you've probably been introduced to this before by me or one of our coaches, but I like to constantly reinforce it. This is how you articulate what in the world you're trying to accomplish and the steps that you're trying to take. I never worry about your ability as a leader to focus on the things below here on the lowest end of your message, if you will, the lowest level of detail, what you think you need, the next thing to buy, the next position to add, the next project to work on. What I find is most leaders can tell quickly what they want to have in place very, very soon. What is often very fuzzy is, why are we doing this? That's your vision for lives. What has God done up to this point over periods of years? What is the longer term plan and our sense of priorities? And then what are the big steps we're trying to take? And then what are the milestones that show our progress? And then we can talk about some of the projects included. So this is a discipline that we call our message. Now, the way you know if you actually are on clear about this is you have to be clear on your message to be clear on these core 4 numbers. So some of you, this is a reminder. For some of you, you might be hearing this for the first time, but these are the most important numbers you need to know every week. I can tell when I meet with leaders how well they're being coached or how well they have learned this when we get into these numbers. And if there's any fuzziness at all, I know that they're going to have a very difficult time in communicating with donors, whether that's face-to-face or in small groups or even in broader communication. Because if you're fuzzy, your communication with that person will be fuzzy as well. So the 4 numbers are answers to questions. What is our long-term giving goal? If you look out 3 to 5 years or so, could be even a couple of years, but what's our long-term goal? What's our progress to date? What is our goal for the end of this giving year? And then what is our near-term milestone? Most of the time of year, you're looking near-term milestone like mid-year. You could have a near-term milestone, say by mid-October, this is where we'd hope to be. Just depends on the pressures that you're feeling for your end goal. But think about the clarity here. Most of the time, people can talk about what they need or a project. What they struggle with is where are you trying to get to by the end of December? That helps a giver make a decision. Can I make a dent in that? Or how am I fitting into that? And then where are we trying to go long term? Where's all this going? What's our progress to date? If I tell you our long-term goal is 10 million, that sounds like a lot. If I tell you our long-term goal is 10 million and we've seen 4 million committed and given already, and we're in our first year, that tells me quite a bit, tells you quite a bit about the progress we're making, correct? And then our near-term focus is seeing the next million committed and as much as 500,000 in cash giving. So I'm just throwing out numbers as an example. Near term, between now and mid-October, really hoping that we will see a handful of people committing at $100,000 level. And I'm asking you to really think and pray about being one of those people. So all that sounds really easy when I say it, right? But that is simply because this is a learned skill. Clarity is something that takes preparation and practice so that you're on point with people. So I know that's a lot of alliteration, but there we go. This time of year, a good way to think about all of this, why this is so blasted important, is that givers give. That's what givers do. Non-givers are not going to give, right? No matter what you say, no matter what you do, all likelihood is they're not going to give. So givers are looking to fill boxes, just like someone wanting to give something on Christmas. I have this box, I need to put something in it. I need a small box or a big box or a medium-sized box. Givers are thinking that way as well. So givers want to give gifts. They're making giving decisions. And if you are thinking one way about the size of gifts or the impact of gifts, that's limiting where givers can see that they fit in. So you want to think about what are these different boxes. So there's this big long-term box that's becoming filled. There's where we want to be by the end of December. And then, yeah, there's specific projects that are part of that along the way. What I find, again, is most people can quickly and easily talk about the smaller projects. They have a hard time helping people understand how it all fits together. So, as I said, I want to reinforce some things about your face-to-face approach. And then I'd like to push you a little bit on your small group approach. Remember, there are only 3 strategies for growing giving: face-to-face, small group, large group. Remember, there are probably tens of thousands of ways to raise money, all of which work. Why? Because givers give. But there are only 3 strategies. So it's important, since you can't do everything, you can't do all the things, to know what's most impactful. So face-to-face is most impactful always. Highest return on investment, lowest cost in terms of time and energy. Most leaders, though, feel like this takes the most time, but that's an illusion. That's just because you're busy and there's so many things pulling at you. And frankly, so many things you'd probably rather do than sit down with people and build trust over time face-to-face. So I want to remind you of a key tool, but then give you a different way of thinking about it, or a mind shift that I think is very important to make, especially at this point in the year. And then I want to get some feedback from what I've reinforced and shared so far. So this is what we teach as a weekly scorecard. This is how you know that you are actually doing the work to grow relationships with people that might make significant giving decisions. It shows up in these numbers. It doesn't show up in your giving numbers until later. So to look and say, what time can I commit in the next 6 weeks? How many face-to-face meetings could I have if I could actually use all the time for this? Is it 6 meetings in the next 6 weeks? Is it 10? Is it 20? I don't know. And the good news is, I don't know that it really matters what the number is, as long as you are progressing toward your goal. What matters is how many hours can you commit? How many meetings could you have? So that, let's say that's 20 in the next 6 weeks. How many do you actually have scheduled? Well, I have 20 slots available. I have 3 scheduled. So that tells me I need to get moving on scheduling. I might need to get others involved in helping me. How many face-to-face meetings did you have this past week? That tells me the pace. Am I having kind of 1 a week, 2 a week, 3 a week? And then lastly, how many people on your follow-up list? This is the number that becomes the real leading indicator. If you are telling me that you hope to see $100,000 given by the end of December, and you have one person on your follow-up list right now, I really hope that one person is in a decision-making process to give $100,000. Otherwise, you are not in the position to achieve your goal. So I want to reinforce this tool, but I want to help you think about shifting your thinking. So what I hear a lot about all the time is struggling to get meetings, I'm having a hard time getting meetings, having a hard time getting my calendar filled. I've committed this time, but I'm having a hard time getting meetings. People don't seem to be as willing to meet. People are busy. It's summer. It's the pandemic. People are coming out of the pandemic. People are traveling. It's on and on and on. But 2 years ago, it was no one wants to meet because of the pandemic. People are tired of Zoom, on and on. It's a struggle to get meetings. It is very hard to get meetings. The solution to this is not a secret weapon in how you schedule meetings. It is to change your mind. Change your mind. The way to think about scheduling meetings is not, is it a struggle? Instead, it is that the math doesn't matter, right? A good way to think about it might be, instead of how many meetings can I get, or how do I make more time for meetings, what would it look like to flip this around and say, wow, I need to back off of face-to-face meetings. I have too many face-to-face meetings. And people go, well, I could never do that because it's hard to get meetings. No, it is always hard to get meetings. Hard to get meetings and getting meetings do not compute. Those two things do not correlate. So yes, you may have to reach out to more people than this leader over here. Maybe this leader can make 6 phone calls and get 6 meetings. You may have to reach out to 60 people, right? But this idea that I'm having a hard time getting meetings and therefore I have very little meetings does not compute. The reason why I would say that is you have not reached out to every giver. You don't even reach out to every giver in a 6-week period, right? And then people say, but those people farther down the list may not be able to give as much. Yes, but you will never get last week back. You could have met with 2 people. You don't know what God might be doing with them. You don't know who they know. You don't know really what they might be able to do. And you definitely can't see what they might be able to do over a long period of time. So you gambled, you bet that this person is not valuable enough to bother trying to schedule. So I'd rather have a week where I'm not moving forward. So I know I'm pushing hard, but I hear this all the time. And I'm like, why does this bother me? Why is this an issue? And it's because it doesn't compute. You can't connect struggling to get meetings to getting the number of meetings. Honestly, before God, if I stayed in that mode, I'm having a hard time getting meetings, people aren't scheduling me, there literally would not be a new campus in St. Louis at the Christian school here that I was involved in as director of advancement. Not because I did it, not because I worked so hard and I got so many meetings, but because I knew, just like you know, nothing happens unless God moves someone to give. And people are not going to be able to make giving decisions if someone doesn't show up and invade their life with what God is doing. So the issue is, I'm sorry, it might be harder. You might have to reach out to 60 people. You might have to reach out to 100. An example I could give you of this is when I first came to St. Louis to work with the head of school here, he would block meetings on his calendar and he would reach out and try to get meetings. He had an assistant she would reach out to. Maybe you don't have an assistant, that's okay. But then I saw something else. He had an assistant who could reach out, and she did, but he would give his list of available meetings for a month, an entire month. Here are the meetings that I could have. And it was quite a long list. And he would give that to a volunteer who was a major donor. And that major donor would have that list every month to go, okay, who could I get for a meeting using this list with these dates? And he wouldn't get 20 meetings, but he would get a few as a volunteer helping that leader. And so that really impacted me, that the issue is not, it's hard to get meetings. That's a truism. It is hard to get meetings. The question is, are you reaching out? Do you have people involved reaching out? So I'll stop preaching. Speaking of numbers, I want to point out this from Numbers 11. Numbers chapter 11. I just love this picture as a leader. Moses is getting really frustrated with the people because they're complaining about God providing manna. They're sick of manna, and they're dreaming about all the food that they used to eat in Egypt. So Moses is seeing that the Lord is very angry, and Moses is very displeased about this. Not only angry at the people, he's really angry at God. And Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you been so hard on your servant? Why haven't I found favor in your sight? You've laid the burden of all these people on me. Was it I who conceived of all these people? Was it I who brought them forth? That you said to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a nursing infant to the land which you swore to their fathers. Where am I to get meat for these people? They weep, saying, give us meat that we may eat. And I alone am not able to carry all this people. It's too burdensome for me. So if you're going to deal with me this way, just kill me now. Just kill me at once, if I have found favor in your sight." Right. So I don't know if you've ever gotten there before, but I love this because I've gotten there before, particularly when talking about, God, where are you going to bring these people? Where are you going to provide? And when God talks, he says, then, okay, well, you go before the people and you tell them I'm going to provide meat, and they're going to be so sick of meat that they'll be complaining about meat. And Moses says, this is interesting. Moses' response to God is, the people among whom I am, and I love that. It's like all these people among whom I am, don't forget, are 600,000 on foot. But you said, I will give them meat so they will eat for a whole month. Should flocks and herds be slaughtered for them to be sufficient for them? Or should all the fish be gathered up to be sufficient? And the Lord said to Moses, is the Lord's power limited? Now you shall see whether my word will come true for you or not. So this is something that I come back to a lot in this whole struggle with people, struggle with God's provision through people. The Lord, is the Lord's power limited? Is the Lord's power limited? And if I believe that it's not limited, then this idea of struggling to get in front of people, struggling with people like Moses, this is something I have to, from time to time, repent of, as Moses did. I'm not seeing this clearly, that the Lord's power is not limited. I have this role to play. God has me among these people, the people among whom I am one. And that helps me. Maybe there's something there for you. Lastly, and then I'm going to pause and get some questions and feedback here, is avoid the mental calculus. So this is the other thing that happens, is not only do we feel like we struggle to get meetings, the people that we are going to meet with or talking with, we're doing all kinds of mental calculus. And I would really encourage you to recognize that this is part of being smart, is you can do calculus in your head about people, but it would probably be most helpful to put that aside as quickly as possible. So it's going to happen. You're smart, but put it aside as quickly as possible. Here's what I mean by mental calculus. Well, I need to spend my time with people who can really give the most. Well, you don't know who can give the most. Well, I've called the 10 people on my list and I didn't get any meetings, so I guess that's that. Well, maybe it's the next 10 people, but Zach, those people can't give us significantly. Well, now we're back to doing mental calculus. So we do all kinds of things, and the internet makes this, I think, even more likely, because we can Google people and we can make all kinds of assumptions, and we create this mental map trying to figure out all these things. And in the time we were doing that, we could have already called 10 more people to get meetings. So the reality is your ability to move forward toward a vision has a lot more to do with your influence and trust that people have in you as a leader than it does just the assumptions that you're making about their resources. So I want to say that one more time. Your ability to move people forward toward your vision has more to do with your influence and trust that you've built with people than it does your assumptions about who can actually do what. So mental calculus is normal. It's not sinful. It's just something that happens in your brain because you're smart, but you want to try to put it aside as quickly as possible and instead approach this with a humility. I don't know who God's going to use. I don't know to what level God is going to use this person. I wish that the 20 people I assume could do the most would meet with me right now, but instead I will focus on the people that God has given me, shepherding the people that God has put in front of you. The way all this comes together on a timeline is what we're going to talk about next. This is something that may be familiar to you by now if you've heard me teaching for quite some time, but I'm going to pause here before we dig into that and answer some questions, get some feedback. So Anne had to leave a little bit early and the recording will be available. Catch me up here, folks. What are some questions? And I'll call on some people too, but you could put a question in the Q&A. You could put a question in the chat. And of course, I'll put a few people on the spot too. So let's see here. Dave Koontz, I'm going to call on Dave. Dave's someone that we worked with one of our coaches for a couple of years, and we saw some amazing things happen there. It's good to see him joining us again here. Let me see, Dave, I'll put you on the spot, see if we can catch you. All right, got to ask you to unmute. There we go. Hey, sir.
Hey there, Zach. How are you?
I'm good. Great to hear your voice.
Yeah, good to hear you. Thanks for continuing to invest.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm interested in your reaction on this. I know I'm hopefully encouraging some. I know I'm pushing hard a little bit too this time of year. Question, comment, feedback?
You know, this time of year is always, I would say, a nervous excitement for me. You know, I resonate with numbers 11 a ton because, you know, it just gives us the opportunity to see God show up in ways that if we don't step out in faith, we wouldn't otherwise. And I'm probably top of the list on who does the mental calculus. Like,
I doubt it. I'm the king of calculus.
And so I think like, I don't know that I have a question as much as I'm just encouraged and reminded that it is a failure on my part to make decisions for God's people based on what I think, or based on my insecurities, or based on my you know, assumptions. And so you know, I think I'm encouraged and I'm reminded that these are opportunities to stir God's people to be a part of God's work. And it's exciting. It's so exciting. So I just love it.
That's really good. Again, my challenge to you there, brother, or my encouragement to you, put you back on mute here, would be to really, again, try to flip this around, where instead of where do I fit meetings in, where do I fit people in when people are who God is going to use on this, put yourself a bit to the test. Say, okay, what would it look like to find myself saying, I'm having too much engagement face to face. I have too many things going on outside the ministry, and I need to pull back inside. And that can happen. So I'm not saying that doesn't happen. It does. But I say, generally speaking, that's not the challenge that leaders complain about. They're complaining about, I don't have enough time. To me, the day-to-day is, you know, catching me too much, all that. Jeff asks a really good question. Says he's brand new in his role as director of development. What are 3 things I need to do in my first 6 months in this new role for the organization and for him? It's a good question, Jeff. The first thing I would suggest doing is what we're talking about here, which is rapidly grow your influence with people. And the only way to do that meaningfully is face-to-face. And so I would, and I lived this out myself, where the first 100 days I was outside my office 50% of the time, outside the organization, which you think about being new, you want to get to know all these people and everything. I instead wanted to send a signal that half the time people would be wondering, where was I? And the idea is I was out advancing, I was out developing. The work is out, not in. So it doesn't mean that the relationship's important. Internally aren't very, very important. They are, but you're not going to typically fund future plans just by focusing internally. So that would be the number one thing above all else. I'd say you have a good 18 months when you're new to still be new and get people's advice and input. So interviewing people is key. So that would be one. Second thing I would suggest is crafting a clear message and plan, even while you're new. And you do that by interviewing people internally. So I see way too much among directors of development saying, well, I need to get, our organization needs to do a strategic plan. Our leader needs to get clear on these things. And so they're sort of passively waiting. And you could be right about all that, but still not able to move things forward. So spending time interviewing people internally about what is your vision? How do we think about vision? How do we think about our students and who they become? Because I think you said you're at a Christian school. And what are our priorities guiding us? What sort of plans do you have, even if it's in your head? And then what are the goals? If I was just going to start writing a check for our future, what would that look like to you? And then you're taking the responsibility to pull all that together. And then the third thing I would focus on would be thanking and reporting. So the likelihood is that many people have given in the past, especially if you look back over years, and they probably haven't heard much at all in terms of thanking and reporting. So that would be the third thing in the first 6 months, is just letting people hear your voice, saying thank you. That's a good question. I'd like to get one more question or feedback on what I've covered so far on this. So let's see here. Who would be willing to raise their hand? Oh, there's Jeremy Marsh. I see you. Great to see you. Thanks for being here. Jamie Elrod, good to see you. So who would have a question they might add to this that I'm pushing you on today? Everybody's always so shy and respectful here. So let me see. I'll call on someone. How about Cheryl Telbert? I'm going to put you on the spot here. Where's Cheryl? There we go. Cheryl, I'll allow you to talk. Ask you to unmute here. You might be eating lunch or something. So can you hear me? She's being shy, I guess. She might be not where she could talk. Cool. So I will, let me see here. I have Cheryl King, I see raising her hand. So we'll go to a different Cheryl, Cheryl King. Cheryl, do you have a question on what I've covered so far?
A question and a comment. You can hear me, right?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you. So we really haven't talked much about small group events, but that was second to face.
Yes.
And when you're not in the middle of a capital campaign, what would you suggest those small events would look like? Would it be better to be on campus, in somebody's home? And, I'm just thinking about doing some of these. And my thought is, all right, who's going to show up and take time? Is it during the school day? Is it in the evening? Do you do a combination?
Right. Good question. So, and this will help me get into the next piece of what I wanted to share here today. So thank you, but let me disable talking here real quick. But to answer your question specifically here, it's all of the above in terms of where or how do you do these. So what we look at is there's no one place. So yes, like new families that if you're at a Christian school that would come on campus, are you going to get everyone? Is there going to be this overwhelming rush of people wanting to come to small groups? Probably not, although sometimes we do see that. So it's just like face-to-face meetings. You have to work to get people there, but it's worth it because 3 people in a room, 5 people in a room, 10 people in a room, that's nearly the equivalent of that many individual meetings. Also, when you have people in a room together, they remember that they were there. So that one small group experience becomes something for several years you're able to connect the dots back to. So you have to be willing to think longer term instead of what are we getting out of any one event. So it's a combination of, yes, host some yourself there on campus. Look for small groups that already exist. That would be the second. So are there groups that already meet through the year here? If so, can we co-op? Can we be invited to those? These aren't fundraising small groups. These are sharing the plan or reporting the past. Third, are there people who would host these, or are there small groups that exist outside? So I've seen examples would be a men's prayer group that meets over lunch, a women's breakfast, church small group that gets together, Bible study groups. I mean, on and on and on. So where groups exist can be helpful, especially when people know you're just excited to talk about what the Lord has done and what you are working and praying that he will do in the future. And then you asked the question, like, if you're not in a campaign, what do you talk about? You talk about 80% of the past. So they might know what you're doing right now. They might have heard how things are going this year. Rarely do people know what the last 5 years or so has looked like and what the Christian community is actually doing by the grace of God in giving to the school. So if you don't have clarity of long-term goals yet, talk 80% the past, 20% the future, near term. Here's what we're working on. Here's our focus as well. And then I think where I'm going next will also give you some more detail because I'm hoping each of you are interested in small groups. So let me share my screen again, and I'll show you just a few things. So this is the way all this comes together, right? We have the 3 strategies on the left-hand side: face-to-face, small groups, large groups. We have the various prospect groups that you hear me talk about. We have the donor journey that you're trying to move them through in terms of timeline. See the timeline down there at the bottom. And then these are not written in stone here, but different stages of this journey along the way in the course of a year. So we're sort of on the second half of this, right? In the second half of the year. If you're looking at small groups, then this is an excellent time of year for past donors for you to be doing leadership briefings or even forming task forces or advisory groups on certain things that you're trying to strengthen as a ministry. Vision events for newer people as well in terms of that recruit category. But when I show, you've seen this probably, I would hope by now. If you're seeing this for the first time, stick around. You'll be seeing this more in live coaching. A good way to think about what you're trying to do with givers is, are you trying to make a presentation? Like this guy's thinking about a presentation. That's not wrong. That can be very effective, a presentation. What can be even more effective is this sort of sitting down, interacting with a couple, right? But this is where we're really trying to see you go most of the time, which is we're working on things together, okay? So a small group is a way to begin to introduce people. Sorry, I dropped my glasses. Introduce people to what the plan is that you're working on and start getting their awareness of it and their feedback to it. And so that way you could be literally one meeting away, one interaction away from them saying, hey, let's do something together. Here's what we're asking people to do. So I have something here I put here in terms of guiding people and asking that you can refer back to later, and asking methods and a gift chart. I'm going to jump though to this issue, small group details. So we teach that if you're talking about a small group event, that there are basically 2 types, and you can call them whatever you want. One would be a vision event. So that would be about introducing someone to the message. Here's our vision. Here's our history. Here's our plan. Here are our steps. Here's why we ask people to give. You would not want to put them on the spot and ask them to give, but here's why we ask when the time comes. That's a vision event. A leadership briefing looks a little more like this, where you're reporting, you're celebrating, you're bringing people up to speed. You're talking a little bit about what's ahead, but it's mainly saying thank you and giving people a report. Now, you can call these whatever you want, but you want to think about whatever you call it. Is this particular small group all about vision, or is this particular small group all about a briefing, a reporting? And so these are those two definitions. And to think about what are the audiences, like Cheryl's question will help you. If we're trying to retain givers and see them move forward in the future, and we're trying to recruit new givers, then a vision event is the way to do that, because it's all about introducing all of this. That's your story and your future. A leadership briefing is much more about how do we keep people involved in giving? How do we even regain people who've given in the past but begun to fall away? So those two approaches impact those audiences really well. As I mentioned, these are not fundraising events. You do not put people on the spot. You let them know these are not fundraising events. When you do talk about giving, you would just say, I do want to take a few minutes and teach you why we ask people to give and how we ask people to think and pray about this when the time comes. And you'll feel sort of the stress level in the room drop down. And so that's what gives people really the space to hear what you're saying and not be waiting for this ask or this pitch. And then it gives them the space to ask questions and give you feedback along the way. And then I've included here some details about these, so you're not just having to remember that a vision event is best for certain things and includes an opportunity to teach people why. It enables people to meet you personally or others on your team, you and volunteer leaders personally, so you can follow up. A leadership briefing is all about thanking, reporting. It renews their interest, their awareness, enables you to help have this sort of informal dialogue, right, and answering their questions along the way. So a great follow-up to these when you're doing these small groups is to be reaching out after via email, via phone call, text, whatever. Thank you for coming. Is there any way we could improve these small group meetings, as we are going to continue to have them in the future? And then would you be open to receiving a proposal from us for you to consider in your giving? So you're asking for permission to ask, essentially. And I see way too much gamesmanship. Like, okay, it's like, okay, now let's send a letter. Let's do this. Let's do that. Just ask them if they'd be open to you sending a proposal. You could do this at the end of the meeting, informally, as you're just visiting with someone. Say, hey, would you be open to me sending your proposal, giving you something specific to consider in giving? Or you can use that in your follow-up as well. So that's a great way to do that. Now, I've covered a lot. I moved over some of the asking, mainly because we talk about that a lot. And I wanted to give you some resources in the slides, but most importantly, I wanted to answer your questions. So with our remaining time here, we've got about 5-10 minutes or so. Let's dig also in your questions, and I might pull some of these slides back up if need be, that would be helpful. So back to questions. As you can tell, I'm kind of pushing you. I know, don't let me push you to the breaking point, but pushing you to think about that face-to-face engine and pushing you to think about how to use small groups, even reasonably. I would say if you haven't done these before, just put it to the test, experiment with these, see what you learn. Okay, so we've got a Q&A here. All right, 2 questions. All right, so first is, could you give us an example of a giving proposal would look like? Okay, and then second, could you spend a little more time talking about what follow-up looks like? Okay, so Angela, if you could clarify for me, maybe in the chat, do you mean follow-up to small groups, or do you mean follow-up like to face-to-face? Those look a little different. So Jen's question, a giving proposal. A giving proposal can be as simple as a 2-page letter that is addressed specifically to the person, highlighting again your vision, your overall plan, the long-term goal, and what your immediate focus is, and a specific request or range for them to consider. So they can be beautiful. I mean, I've seen some nice digital ones people have put together, but keep it very simple. You want to provide information when questions are asked. So I see way too much money and time spent trying to anticipate all the questions in the material. And so it's a 5-page letter that answers every question and has a frequently asked questions section or whatever. And people who are making decisions, especially if you're putting a proposal in front of them, they're not typically going to look at that and just make a decision. They're busy. They're going to put it aside. So you have to keep following up. And it's helpful to say, I imagine you have some questions. There might be some additional information you'd like to look at. So be careful about overdoing those proposals. Start simple. And as people respond, as people make decisions, you'll refine that over time. So I encourage people to start simple and refine it rather than try to have like the end all be all best one. The best proposals I've ever seen were from failed campaigns. So there's no connection between beautiful proposals and succeeding in goals, for sure. What matters is it clear? Does it make sense? And did you prepare it as specifically as you could for that person? So that's a great question. Angela asked about follow-up, a little more about what follow-up looks like. So follow-up, let me show you a slide here that could give you some detail. Follow-up is where the results come. So because everyone is just like you, they're all busy. Even a well-meaning person who wants to make a giving decision is busy and puts these things aside. That's why so many gifts are given in the last 48 hours of the year, because people are last minute. There's a lot of reasons, but that's one of the big ones. So follow-up is where the results come, because follow-up is where you're reminding them that they have a decision that's been put in front of them to make. So let me share my screen. This could be a helpful slide for you, Angela, or anyone interested in follow-up. These are some helpful things to keep in mind. I think I need to get the Q&A out of the way there. Anytime you're meeting with people, even a small group, what is some of the advice they gave you? Are there people they wanted to connect you with? What did you learn from them? Having notes, even if it's not in a database, just having notes and having somewhere that's retrievable. There's nothing that's more frustrating to a giver to make a suggestion that you nodded and listened to, but then never comes up again. You ignore them. Hey, I'd like to introduce you to so-and-so, and then there's no follow-up. This happens to me all the time because sometimes I'll think of someone that oh man, they really should connect to this person. I'll bring it up, but I'm not going to chase that person down. Do you really want me to introduce you to this person? If they're serious about it, they'll let me know that they're interested and I can make that introduction. Add the person to your follow-up list. So before you're even doing anything, just knowing these are people I'm following up with. That's again why small groups are so helpful, is you're rapidly growing your follow-up list. Instead of one at a time, now it's 3, 5, 7, 10, 12, on and on we go. Send an email or memo of understanding. That's where you're clarifying what you discussed. Thank you for the meeting. Here's what I heard you say. Here's a couple of things I was trying to share. Looking forward to our next step together. Or that's where you could do all of that. Say, would you be open at all to me sending you a proposal of something specific to consider in your giving? So that's identifying that next step. Place the next action on your calendar. Our coaches really focus on this with leaders. Once you know what the next step is, put it on your calendar, because that means you're likely to not drop that ball. And then along the way, follow-up is just about a lot of updates, progress, asking for advice or help. You could text them updates or send them a link to something authentic and interesting, saying just thank you again and thank you for that meeting. Thank you again that you're even willing to consider giving to us. Those are all very respectful ways of keeping things in front of people. So those are some practical things. And in small groups, what you're trying to do is make that very replicable. You're trying to do a few of those things over and over each small group, so it becomes somewhat automatic, if you will. Because if you're doing this face-to-face with a few, then you can get crushed by the amount of follow-up in small groups. So you want to build a sort of a repeatable process. Let's see, a couple other questions. Angela, I hope that helps. Let's see here. Dave asked, let me stop my screen share here. Dave asked, we're in the middle of strategic planning, so the future is still a bit unknown. How do we enter into this asking season with confidence when we're not quite confident yet about the future? Oh, that's a fantastic question. This comes up all the time. So be clear about what you can be clear about. So what you can be clear about for sure is what's happened in the past. Okay. So that's important, to not just look at the last year, but the past. So givers give, that's what they do. So when they see that there's been a fruitfulness and effectiveness in the past, they want to build on that. I would say that could be just as important as what's next. The next thing would be clear about what you can be clear about. So even though some of the things might be fuzzy, I'm pretty sure you know how much money is required before now and the end of December. You are probably pretty clear on a basic number of people that would impact, or how, even if it means just keeping you strong as you go into the new year. You also might be clear about some of the questions that you're considering, some of the planning that you're actually doing. So that in itself is something that you can be clear about. So you can say, we're considering this, we're planning for this. These are some of the things that we're looking at. And so if you think about that, the past, I'm clear on at least the near term and why this matters near term. And then here's some of the things that we're working on in the future. It's okay to say for long term, we're in a strategic planning process. Here's some of the big questions that we're considering. And our near term focus between now and in December is what? And what will that accomplish? So try not to try to be bold and clear about what you can be clear about, and be honest about what you're working on or the questions that you're asking. So I think that's all the questions that we have time for. Yes, Angela said that helped her. Great. Please reach out if you had a question and you just did not feel comfortable asking it in front of the whole group. You could email me, you could text me. We will follow up with the slides and the recording, of course, and really interested to see how this investment of time in you is used by God to impact more people and more lives. So keep me in the loop, please. And hope to see you. Hope you see y'all next month together. We will do live coaching each month through the end of the year, I think, certainly in October, November. So I'll be seeing you all very soon. So appreciate you. Talk to you soon.